All right, let's get into it. We are talking about one of the most incredible industrial shakeups of our time, how China went from being a total non-player to the absolute king of electric vehicles. And, the story kicks off in a pretty weird place.
You've got to picture this. Just fields, literally filled with abandoned electric cars. And these aren't old rust buckets. They're the casualties of a revolution that happened so fast it just left its own creations in the dust. It's a wild symbol of the insane speed and the brutal competition that defined China's EV explosion.
And just look at what that speed led to. I mean, back in 2015, China was exporting fewer cars than India or even the United States. Fast forward to 2023 and boom, while everyone else was looking the other way, China just leapfrogged the entire world. It's a mind-blowing climb to the top of the global auto industry.
So you have to ask, right? How did this happen? How did a country that was light years behind the big legacy automakers in Germany, Japan, and the US manage to not just catch up, but completely own the next generation of cars? Well, it turns out they didn't do it by playing by the old rules.
Okay, so the first thing you have to understand is that China's leadership knew they couldn't win in a head-to-head fight on traditional gas engines. So what did they do? They didn't just join the race, they decided to start a completely new one.
But why even bother starting this new race? Well, the real motivation came from two enormous, kind of existential crises that were literally choking the country. A desperate need for oil and an even more desperate need for clean air.
And this chart really lays out the first problem. It's a huge imbalance. China was consuming over 13% of all the oil in the world, but had only about 1.5% of the proven reserves. This put them in a really vulnerable spot, national security-wise, relying on oil shipped across oceans, patrolled by the U.S. Navy, not exactly a great position for a rising superpower.
And at the same time, this was happening on the ground, a truly devastating public health crisis. The air pollution, a ton of it from cars, was contributing to over 4,000 deaths every single day. And unlike other problems, the smog was hitting the wealthiest cities the hardest, making a lot of powerful people very, very angry. Something had to give.
So, you can see how the path forward became crystal clear. China was losing the old game of gas-powered cars. But electric vehicles? That was a chance to leapfrog everyone, solve its energy dependency, and clean up the air, all in one shot. So the first phase of this whole plan was pure top-down government muscle. Beijing knew a market for EVs didn't really exist, so it decided, fine, we'll just create one, using a very, very heavy hand. The initial strategy was this kind of three-pronged attack. First, create demand by having cities buy up thousands of electric buses and taxis. Second, throw huge subsidies at consumers. We're talking up to $16,000 off a car. But it was that third piece, a really clever bit of social engineering that turned out to be the secret weapon. And here it is. This was the real game changer. In massive cities like Beijing, getting a license plate is almost impossible. You might have to win a lottery against insane odds or pay more than $10,000. But if you bought an EV, you got a special green plate instantly. It was a golden ticket. And for over half of the buyers, it was the single biggest reason they went electric.
Well, the policies worked a little too well. All of a sudden, China had hundreds of EV companies. The problem was, a lot of them were weak, uncompetitive local champions that were only being kept afloat by their local city government's protectionism. It was a really fragile bubble, just waiting to pop.
And this is where the story takes a really wild turn. What Beijing did next was just shocking. Instead of protecting its new industry even more, it decided to drop what was basically a nuclear bomb right in the middle of it, a move that would change everything. So you have this market, it's flooded with all these fragile, struggling companies. What do you think Beijing did? The answer was something nobody saw coming. In a complete 180, the state took a step back and let pure, raw, unfiltered competition take over. And the policy changes were swift. They started cutting subsidies, they banned local protectionism, but then came the real bombshell. Beijing rolled out the red carpet for Tesla, letting it build a 100% foreign-owned factory, a first in China. They basically invited an 800-pound gorilla into the ring to fight their own homegrown champions. Now, to understand just how big of a deal this was, you have to look at the US market. It's not really an EV market, it's a Tesla market. One company has completely dominated, and real competition has been pretty slow to show up.
Okay, now contrast that with China. By unleashing Tesla, they started an absolute explosion of competition and innovation.
In just 1 year, Chinese companies released 107 new EV models, from tiny $5,000 city cars to high-end luxury sedans. 107! And the result of all that competition? An all-out, bloody price war. It was brutal. Something like 80% of China's EV companies went bankrupt. But here's the crazy part. This painful collapse was exactly what Beijing wanted. It was survival of the fittest on a massive national scale.
So this high-stakes gamble didn't just pay off. It basically created a new world order in the auto industry, and now it's left America scrambling to figure out how to catch up.
Because those companies that made it through the fire, they didn't just survive, they thrived. They were forged in the world's most competitive market. I mean, today, a domestic champion like BYD sells more electric cars than the next 6 competitors combined. It's insane.
And you know, America isn't just behind. It's playing a completely different game. You look at everything from what consumers want to the supply chains to government policy, the U.S. is just starting from a fundamentally different and much harder position.
But China's ultimate victory here, it isn't just in building the cars, it's in controlling what goes inside them. By refining the huge majority of the world's essential battery minerals, they've made sure that pretty much every EV company on Earth, including America's, depends on their supply chain.
And that leaves us with a really stark reality. The U.S. wants to build its own EV industry, and at the same time, it wants to cut China out of the picture. But the problem is, for now, a world without China's supply chain is basically a world without EVs. Which leaves us with a big question. Can America, starting a decade and a half behind, really build its own?